Our next speaker is Peter Augustine Lawler. He is Dana Professor of Government at Berry College in Georgia, teaches courses on political philosophy and American politics, which is where we have intersected many times over the years at American Political Science Association annual meetings especially. He's written or edited 15 books. His book, Modern and American Dignity, is most recently published one. For that, he was named Georgia Author of the Year. Many of his books have been widely reviewed. Postmodernism Rightly Understood, an interesting concept. Aliens in America, Stuck with Virtue, we had at least one copy of those in the back, and Homeless and a Home at Home in America. He was the 2007 winner of the Weaver Prize for Scholarly Excellence in Promoting Human Dignity to a broad audience. He's spoken at roughly 100 American colleges and universities and published well over 200 articles, chapters, and reviews in a wide variety of venues. You can also find him blogging online at various interesting sites. He was a member of the President Bush's Council on Bioethics and served on that until it met an unhappy demise, or I don't know, maybe happy demise in 2009. So welcome to Peter.
So let me follow the good example of trying to remember the first time I took Walker Percy seriously. It wasn't when I read The Moviegoer. I read that in college, and I had a what the blank is that reaction to that when I read it first. But I was in the Harvard bookstore with Dan Mahoney, sometimes called Dan the Biblioman. So I actually don't like bookstores much, and I wanted to spend about 5 minutes there. But he had attracted a crowd and was literally, going through the bookstore and explaining the meaning of every book in the Harvard bookstore. And this was taking a while, so I was bored out of my mind. And so I picked up a copy of a little blue book called More Interviews with Walker Percy or something like that. And I just opened it at random, and Percy's answering a question, and he says, that Tocqueville, he really knew what he was talking about. Tocqueville said, those Americans are Cartesians who have never ever read a word of Descartes. I said, well, that's like a better way of putting it than Tocqueville put it. And so I said, anyone who knows Tocqueville has to be a friend of mine. And so, as they say, my learning style is definitely not novels. And so I began reading his essays in Lost in the Cosmos, and came to understand the novels in that way. But that's probably the way Percy wanted it. If you ever read the letters between Shelby Foote and Percy, Shelby Foote is sending Percy letter after letter saying, you don't know the first thing about the English language. You don't understand its cadence. That's like even in The Moviegoer. And it's true, Shelby Foote was a much better stylist than Walker Percy, but he had nothing to say. And I said it with great, except about the Civil War. I mean, right, it's not quite the American Iliad, but it's a really good account of the Civil War. But Walker Percy had so much to say, and he had all kinds of reasons I can't go into now for wanting to say it in novel form. But the novel was very much an acquired taste for him. He's a philosopher who became a novelist. And it's Shelby Foote, who was a tremendous stylist, but wasn't as Southern as Faulkner, so didn't believe a word of that stuff. He really suffered from not really having anything to write about until he took on the Civil War. So for that reason, I'm going to talk about Lost in the Cosmos, which is subtitled The Last Self-Help Book. And Percy said one reason he had that title is so the book would end up in the self-help part of bookstores such as Barnes & Noble. And it did, and it really is sort of, and it is written like something like a self-help book in the form of the 20-question multiple-choice self-help quiz. But in Percy's case, all the answers are partly right. Right? It's like when you have a multiple-choice test in college, you sometimes have that experience. Well, they're all right. But in Percy's case, each question, the answer really is partly right, because each question refers to a certain understanding we have of ourselves according to a particular mood. And it turns out all these moods have something to say to us. And this, I think, gets from Heidegger, that moods are revelations of being. So according to Percy, our bookstores are mostly full of two kinds of books. The first kind of book is the self-help book, which is most candidly named Idiot's Guide. And I think Idiot Guide books are really good. Idiot's Guide to How to Get a Mate, How to Lose Weight, How to Pick Up 7 Habits and Be Highly Effective, and all that. And so it's true, if you go to a bookstore, a lot of the bookstore is self-help books. Most of the rest of the bookstore are diverting or entertaining books about scandal-ridden law firms, about extraterrestrials, about vampires, and about a bunch of sexually obsessive shades of gray. And there's nothing wrong with diversions, Percy says to a point. They get your mind off yourself. They relieve your stress. They help you in alleviating your fears, your anxieties, your boredom. Now, according to Pascal, and Percy has a huge debt to Pascal simply by using the word diversion a lot. According to the Christian thinker Pascal, most of our lives are diversions. Most of our lives are escapes from what we really know. Most of our lives are evidence of our misery without God. According to Percy, most of our lives of these days are diversions that become progressively more disappointing. The pursuit of happiness has become the pursuit of diversion in the midst of prosperity, or as libertarians say, choosing according to our preferences from the menu of choice. But one problem among many in our highly self-conscious time is that we know too readily our diversions are only diversions. And diversions that you know are only diversions are boring, or very weak ways of fending off despair. So that's why Percy knew that people visiting museums are mostly ineffectively fending off despondency. I challenge you to go to a museum, sit in a chair and watch. This is actually true. That's why, I'm a pretty happy guy, so I never, this is kind of, I think I'm stuck in a museum here for the moment, but otherwise I never go to a museum. And that's why highly educated bourgeois Americans today try so hard and fail miserably in trying to be bohemians too. But here's what Percy adds. Self-help books are basically diversions too. They claim to use the latest studies to tell us who we are and what we're supposed to do. Percy hates this phrase, studies show. And Heidegger has the phrase, they say, studies show or they say. If you really think something, you say, I think. If you are surrendering even your sovereignty over your own experiences, you say, studies show. So when I teach, in fact, and I say something that's pure baloney, pure speculation, I'm just making it up, I say studies show. Because I would have no idea what studies show. So what the studies show is we are, like the other animals, organisms and environments. And we can be happy if we think for ourselves, listen to the experts, stay safe or avoid all the risk factors, get rich, and have effective interpersonal dynamics. But lots of us, Percy observes, faithfully follow this self-help advice and end up feeling more disoriented or displaced or more empty than ever. So all the self-help experts can add is, stay busy, keep positive, and eventually things will turn around for you. So what self-help books are diversions that work well but eventually fail, as all diversions do. They can't extinguish self-consciousness or the self or the soul by denying that what's distinctively human about each of us really exists. They can't take out what the existentialists, such as Kierkegaard and Heidegger, truthfully describe about us. The truth is we're not organisms in environments, and so we can't lose ourselves, our personal identities in some environment, in some cosmos in which we are merely a part. Or, to reduce it to a bumper sticker, we can't lose being lost. That's why the master psychologist, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, heard just beneath the surface of all our happy talk, pragmatism, the howl of existentialism. And that's why we can be happy in bad environments, like Solzhenitsyn was happy in the Gulag, because he knew who he was and what he was supposed to do. And that's why we can be miserable in good environments. So Percy reports that Mother Teresa thought the Americans were sadder or more impoverished than the people she actually ministered to in Calcutta. And I got to resist this. Solzhenitsyn mentioned once in Lost in the Cosmos, but I could talk about that for 45 minutes. But Percy says American writers have Solzhenitsyn envy, because Solzhenitsyn was taken so seriously by his country, and his country was so challenged by his truth-telling that they threw him in a gulag. Yeah. But American writers can say anything they want, and people yawn. And that's why, okay, I myself, I'm okay with America, not gulag. All right. So for Percy, the anxiety we should experience from being lost, the experience we should have of being inexplicable or absurd leftovers in the world the experts described, that anxiety ought to be a prelude to wonder about how strange the human soul or self is. But for the experts, anxiety that has no environmental cause, such as being isolated from the other social animals, must have a physical or chemical cause, that is a natural/material cause. So there must be a physical or chemical remedy, a mood-altering or mood-elevating drug. As Percy explains, for our experts, psychiatry, discovering who we are and what we're supposed to do through conversation, is replaced for us by a certain kind of chemotherapy. For Percy, Socrates and even Freud were old-fashioned doctors of the soul. Their approach was time-consuming and expensive, and the results uncertain or unreliable. For our experts, who cares what the real cause is if we can so effectively manage the symptoms? Why shouldn't we choose the moods that make us upbeat and productive? And if moods are merely collections of chemicals, that's what we should do. So when these mood-elevating drugs get a little bit more reliable, for example, now I'm not going to refer briefly, what is the most moody and unproductive profession? College professor. But isn't that actually true now that I've called it to your attention? So a college professor is not easy, because Percy once taught one course at Loyola or somewhere, and he said, during that semester I was so exhausted I couldn't do any writing. I did not feel his pain at all. I mean, especially since his students reported he didn't actually teach anything. Okay, but strike that. So you're a moody professor, or your student evaluations are bad, you're not in that kind of mood that makes you productive as a scholar. The dean calls you in and says, we'll give you tenure if you get yourself down to the drugstore and get your mood fixed up. And if you can say to the dean, no, I have a right to my moods, they're what makes me deep. The dean responds, deep schmeep, moods are collections of chemicals. All the studies show that. Go down there and get a better collection. So you might want to say, if the experts are right, you have no right to your moods, because they're just random collections of chemicals that can be altered. So for the experts, self-consciousness doesn't become the enemy, but something to be controlled or managed like everything else through technology. But the truth is that even drugs or chemotherapy don't work much better than diversions. It's easy to zap self-consciousness. We see that in a Thanatos syndrome. But the problem with zapping self-consciousness out of existence is that makes the zappers the masters and the zaps the slaves. The zappers, as a result, become more miserably lonely than ever. And in our irrational pride and our love, we really don't want to surrender our personal identities. We want to be able to repeat, to manage self-consciousness, to be alienated, but not too alienated. The way I like to explain this is, we want to be able to be alien enough to appreciate Johnny Cash without going through the hell of actually being Johnny Cash. But our experts don't really know what kind of engineered mood or what kind of judicious cocktail of moods would make us truly happy or at home. So it turns out our moods, the moods we've been given by nature, are indispensable clues to the truth about who we are and what we're supposed to do. And that's the real message of Lost in the Cosmos. So that's why Percy says, I have a right to my anxiety. It's my right to liberty that might lead me to real truth and real happiness. If I had more turn, you also have a right to your shyness. Percy says only idiots aren't shy, because if you're not shy, it supposes you know what you're doing. So the deep man he talks about is Johnny Carson. But the deep man I would talk about to the few that means something to is Harvey Mansfield. You know, who knows something's missing in Harvey Mansfield, which is why he's so shy. But he's deep enough to know something's missing in Harvey Mansfield. The self-help books can't teach us why we have the right to our anxiety, because they don't acknowledge, they don't tell the truth, that each of us is invincibly lost in the cosmos. Without help, we can't possibly provide for ourselves. We're born to trouble as sparks fly upward. Our alienation doesn't have an environmental or physical or political or historical cause, and so doesn't have environmental, physical, political, historical cure. It's part of who we are, part of our natures, part of self-consciousness, part of personal identity. It's at the core of our real psychology. So every self-help book has been a failure until Percy's. His is the first truthful and effective self-help book. And that's why it's the last self-help book. He explains quite scientifically why each of us is homeless. And by so doing, he says, he helps us be ambiguously at home with our homelessness, and so free to be as home as we can be with the good things of the world. So the title, Lost in the Cosmos, means to be a correction to a book by Carl Sagan called Cosmos. One problem with Lost in the Cosmos for you young people, more this side of the room, is no one knows who Carl Sagan is anymore. But Carl Sagan used to be on the talk shows. He was a classy, very intelligent guy. And what Carl Sagan was, I'll explain in a second, was a popularizing scientist, an evangelical physicist, or a high-level writer of self-help books. So Sagan says, get your mind off your insignificant self by getting it on the magnificence of the stars and the planets. Every moment in human progress has been about the demotion of man's place in the cosmos until he has become an insignificant speck on a pale blue dot. So we have every reason to use our minds to take pleasure in losing ourselves in the wonders of the cosmos. This is nothing new. Sagan agrees with Socrates that the way of life of the scientist or the philosopher is learning how to die. Another way of putting that, getting over yourself, getting over all the illusions you have about your personal significance. So Sagan says we are in two senses parts of wholes. Insofar as you are a mind, your mind corresponds to the cosmos. And so you're a part of the whole cosmos. And a great philosopher, some of you know, actually said that the human mind is at home in the cosmos, and so it is. And then insofar as you're a body, you're at home in the cosmos as a part of a species. So as mind, you're part of the cosmos. As body, you're a part of the species. So Sagan actually says, lose yourself in the species. Let's make species preservation our sacred cause. As long as our species stays on this planet, we're toast. An asteroid's going to take us out eventually. And even our sun only has 1 million years or so left. And so if we really want our species to last forever, we have to populate other solar systems. So let's start to wander around in the name of species preservation. But, so Sagan's self-help is, like all scientists, in two respects we're parts. Our mind isn't lost, and our body isn't lost. So if you want to understand who Sagan was, I guess, although it's not exactly the same because Sagan was classier, go to the bookstore now and go to the section called New Atheists. There are lots of new atheists. They all popularize science, and they all write self-help books, like Dawkins and Dennett and those guys. So these new atheists always say, we have two choices: the free thought of the scientist or the repressive moralism of the religious fundamentalist. These atheists, they always say, religion is necessarily hostile to science because there is no room in what science tells us about the cosmos for a personal God. And why is there no room for a personal God in the cosmos? There's no room for persons in the cosmos, but there's only room for bodies, described by Darwin in one way and by physicists in another. There's room for bodies and there are rooms for minds, but there's no room for Percy's. So the self-help of science, which when science becomes a self-help book, Percy says it becomes scientism, or explaining everything, or going way beyond what the scientific studies actually show. So the self-help scientism offers is to become a mind who knows the truth about bodies. If you know the truth about bodies, you're free from angry judgmentalism and crazy superstitions, the false hopes and the crippling fears that have screwed up human life for no good reason so far. And Percy, I can't go into this right now, Percy's all with the scientists and against the superstitions. But it reminds us that Christians are all with the scientists and against the superstitions. But Percy says this scientism versus fundamentalism thing, this is one reason why our world is so screwed up. The dispute between scientific popularizers like Sagan and the new atheists and fundamentalists who believe God created the world 6,000 years ago, this dispute, Percy says, is enough to give both science and Christianity a bad name. The scientists are certainly right to say the fundamentalists are wrong to willfully deny what we can know through science. So the fundamentalists are wrong to talk about worldviews, like there's a scientific worldview, the Christian worldview, pick one. Percy adds that the fundamentalists do Christianity a misleading disservice by saying what Christianity teaches really is incompatible with what we can know through science. So the scientists are certainly right to say evolution happened, but they're wrong to say that some homogeneous theory of evolution can explain who we are. They're even wrong to say that some homogeneous theory can explain what actually happened. That man, that being with complex language, showed up so late and so unexpectedly. All right. So when I talk at evangelical colleges, I quote, evangelical is not the same as fundamentalist, but it depends which college, how close it is. So when I talk at evangelical colleges, I often quote Percy, or I shamelessly sample, and that's jazz for plagiarize, his arguments to get them over their prejudice that they must choose between evolutionism and creationism. Evolution happened, I say, get over it. But that's not to say it's really scientific to believe that the reigning neo-Darwinian theories actually explain anywhere near completely who we are or what we're supposed to do. When I go to sophisticated secular colleges like UNC, except this room, but more like Swarthmore or Pomona or places like that, I begin by asking, how do you square what you believe about evolution with what you believe about your personal autonomy? So isn't it true the typical sophisticated young person today believes in autonomy and Darwin explains it all? And then, okay, but do you sophisticated secularists who aren't here right now, do you believe that you really have a theory of man that explains how an autonomous chimp came into being? Do you really have a theory that reconciles what Darwin says about the eusocial animal, like the really, really, really social animal, and what the feminists and transhumanists say about not being determined by our bodily instincts? So like the Supreme Court and Planned Parenthood says, we're mysteriously empowered to make ourselves up, which might be true. I don't have the warrant to say that's not true. But how do you square that with the theory of evolution? All right, so my real experience, despite what Percy rightly calls the self-correcting mechanisms of the scientific method, is that the secularists get more angry with me than the fundamentalists, because the fundamentalists actually love to argue in the service of truth and love more. So the secularists need the therapy of figuring out what's wrong with Carl Sagan. So Percy talks about Carl Sagan in his two-part explanation of the lonely self. In fact, one subtitle of this book before the final thing came out was, or Why is Carl Sagan so lonely? Which was, I think, better in a way. But so the first part of Percy's two-part explanation of the lonely self is his explanation of the loneliness of the autonomous self. We experience ourselves these days as autonomous, or on our own without any guidance in figuring out who we are and what we're supposed to do. Now the downside of being autonomous is being alone. And the autonomous self can't help but experience him or herself not only as all alone in the world of other people. So the autonomous self doesn't have friends, the autonomous self networks, but of course all alone in the cosmos that is indifferent to his or her singular existence. And so the hyper-autonomous self is a transhumanist, which is me against nature, because I'm gonna take out the nature that's out to kill me. From that, well, we won't overdo that. But Percy then asks why it is that, in thinking about scientists and the autonomous self, why is it that people in general, and scientists in particular, are so lonely that they want so badly to believe that dolphins and chimps can speak? Scientists in particular want to believe this so badly that they will compromise their science. And so one answer Percy gives that at this point in the progress of science, the only thing human beings have left that distinguish us from the other animals is language or complex speech. And if we can take out speech or language, then we will be in every respect just like the other animals. So Galileo and Copernicus dethroned man by showing us that the earth is not the center of the cosmos. Darwin deprived us of many characteristics of species uniqueness, and Darwin dissed the idea authoritatively that we're infinitely significant and irreplaceable beings with a soul made in God's image. And so now what the scientists are doing, and they really are doing this, that the symbolic behavior of human beings that flow from language, such as art and music, and we should add philosophy and poetry, these aren't unique to our species ever either. So if we can show that dolphins can talk, then we can show that there is nothing unique about man at all, human beings at all in the cosmos. So scientists offer the self-help of curing the autonomous self of his or her loneliness by denying autonomy could really exist at all. It's not that the other species, or at least the really smart mammals, are just like us, but we're just like them. Feeling alone, feeling anxious or displaced for some existential or personal reason is based on illusion. Each of us, like all the other species, is part of a species and part of the cosmos. So the bad news might be the studies now show there's nothing in me that's unique and irreplaceable. And all the scientific studies show there's nothing in me that's unique and irreplaceable. And some other bad news might be that I'm not autonomous, but determined by the impersonal laws or forces that govern the cosmos as a whole. But the really good news is I am not alone. Autonomy is just another word for cluelessness, or having nothing left to lose but experiencing oneself as not being. So who wouldn't want to lose that? But Percy's, the next part of his talking about loneliness is, the only problem with this scientific theory is it just doesn't work. Look around. Man remains a lonely and troubled species who does not know who he is or what he's supposed to do with himself. And so we still feel ourselves different from the other creatures, both superior and inferior. And so we still know, despite all the scientific expertise in the world, we're superior and inferior to the other species. One source of our superiority, of course, is we study the other species scientifically, and they don't study us. And you could add to this, as a techno-species, we decide what other species exist, and they don't do the same for us. So we're okay with taking the tuna out because they taste so good and they're dumb and ugly, but we're giving the dolphin a pass because they're smart and cute, don't taste that good, and who knows, they may talk to each other. But we can switch it up anytime we want and start to worship tuna and take out the dolphin. But the truth is, we scientists, we philosophers, we knowers, we know, give me a break, there are no dolphin scientists and dolphin philosophers, no dolphin poets. And we know those dolphins are not transcending the world of bodies as we can in a way through their minds. So even the dolphin, I mean, there's a study that just came out, maybe the dolphins give each other cute little names, but and that might actually be true. So the scientists don't really, for a moment, believe that they'll be able to talk to the dolphins about physics and their place in the cosmos. But we're inferior to the other animals because we're so obviously not very good animals. We, unlike our friends the dolphins, so often act stupidly and self-destructively. Our cruelty and sentimentality seemingly needlessly threaten the very feature of our species and the very feature of the environment of our species. We're the beings capable of so trashing the planet that it may soon be uninhabitable. And we're the beings who may yet just blow ourselves and our environment up for emptily ideological or stupidly superstitious reasons. Both global warming and the birth dearth. They hardly ever cover the birth dearth in environment classes for some reason. Both global warming and the birth dearth are evidence that our unique and seemingly inexplicable pretensions toward autonomy lead us to slight, to the eve of destruction, our fundamental duties to our species. What's the only species that's not doing our duties to the species? We're it. Other species, they check in fine. Okay. And so we really know, despite all the experts, that there's no scientific cure for our self-conscious experience, for being alone in the cosmos. And we know we're not really helped that much by a science that knows more and more about the cosmos and less about each of us. Communicating with the chimps and the dolphins on some elementary level won't eradicate what makes us superior and inferior to them. So quickly, Carl Sagan, he was less himself about talking to the dolphins, and he was more in favor of talking to extraterrestrials. So he was this massive propaganda machine about the need to search the cosmos for other forms of intelligent life. And he did this with tremendous effectiveness. That the two movies about benign extraterrestrial life are E.T., which is the only movie I've ever walked out of. I guess thought it was so unbelievably cloying, I couldn't stand it. E.T. and Contact, which is actually a better movie, starring Jodie Foster, based upon the novel written by Sagan. And these give us the really positive impressions of extraterrestrial life. But here's Percy's response. Because Sagan has an unrealistic view of himself, his views of ETs, the ones we see in the movie E.T. and in the movie Contact, are unrealistic. He is right to see that he, and all of us, need help we can't possibly provide for ourselves. But there's no reason to believe that the ETs we encounter elsewhere will be any less screwed up than we are. If what's wrong with us is part of our nature, being a being conscious of itself, being a self conscious of itself, it's reasonable to believe that self-conscious ETs and the rest of the cosmos, ETs smart enough to be high-tech beings, will be just like us, lost in the cosmos. So the first Men in Black movie, it gives us a much more realistic view of what ETs will probably be like. The most recent Men in Black movie had it suffered from the failing of insufficient extraterrestrial character development. It was all about the issues of the Earthlings. So the ETs might be more techno-advanced, but they'll be no less cruel, murderous, vain, sentimental, loving, hating, and heroic than we are. So if they find out about us, they'll be a constant threat to us. And we'll have to have a whole force of secret agents just to manage that threat, which, if we're lucky, many, many close calls. If it comes to our attention that such ETs exist, we should do everything we can to hide from them. There's also a lot of truth in the portrayal of extraterrestrials in Independence Day. Why wouldn't the ETs be resource-sucking, planet-trashing beings just like us? And Sagan himself says we should join them in becoming planet-hopping in the service of being hardwired by nature to put our species first. So we show up, so we're putting our species first, you guys are toast. That's all they do on Independence Day. It's not that bad, except for us. So we're going to be really bad news for lesser forms of life we might encounter on other planets, just like we've been plenty hard on plenty of species on our planet. And in the point of the first space odyssey in Lost in the Cosmos, if for reasons we really can't fully understand, there are self-conscious beings on other planets that have freed themselves have been freed from the predicament of being lost selves by getting help they couldn't provide for themselves, which is like a veiled allusion to Revelation. If there are beings like that, if there are beings like the beings you see in Contact, here's the truth. They won't want to have anything to do with us. We'll be a constant threat to their existence in Eden. Why would they want us around? If we showed up at their door, as Percy does explain in the first Space Odyssey, they'll tell us to get lost, and they'll tell us to get lost on account we're lost. So here's Percy's self-help advice to the lonely Sagan, the Sagan who's so lonely he has to look all around the cosmos for friends he can't find here on Earth. He says, here's my advice to you, my self-help advice. Stop wondering so much about the stars and start wondering more about yourself, about all of us, about the strangest and most elusive beings in the cosmos. We're the only aliens in the cosmos. Aliens are us. We wander, we're lost, Percy explains, because we wonder. The price we pay for being given the natural capacity to wonder is to wander, to experience ourselves as displaced leftovers in the cosmos we can otherwise describe so well. So the quote at the beginning of Lost in the Cosmos is from Nietzsche. And here's what Nietzsche says: we knowers are of necessity unknown to ourselves. That is by nature of necessity. The wanderer and wanderer is neither a mind nor a body or even some mixture of the two. We wanderers and wanderers are third kinds of beings. We are beings with a self or a soul. Another way of putting it is we're persons. As the philosopher Pope, who just stepped down, explains in different language, but it's the same thing, logos is personal. As far as we know, logos is only present in persons, in beings who can not only think but create and love and experience themselves as having irreducible personal identities. So that could lead us to believe that the true science would tell us that the logos of nature is personal. And if the logos of nature is personal, then it's not preposterous at all to believe it originates with a personal creator, a God who is both logos and love. So Percy's all for a new or genuinely comprehensive science that puts back together the wondering of the Greek philosophers and the wandering of the Christian pilgrims. So what do you call Pope Benedict now? I'm not going to call anyone emeritus, but yeah, I wouldn't do that to anyone. But that guy, you know, Ratzinger, because his beautiful, you know, goodbye statement was, "This is I'm basically a pilgrim. This is the last phase of my pilgrimage on earth," and so putting back together wondering and wandering, we can call that, in a loose sense, Thomism. But there's another way of putting it. Sagan is all for the science that puts back together the wondering, I'm not Sagan, Percy is all for the science that puts back together the wondering of scientists like Sagan. And you know, Percy is actually a great admirer of Sagan. And what he knows, he really knows. He just thinks he knows more than he really does. He puts back together the wondering of modern scientists and the wandering of the existentialists who write of the absurdity of being human in a cosmos indifferent to our existence. And so today, putting back together wondering and wandering, or, you know, Anglo-American natural science with European existentialism, that putting back together would also be Thomism. But Percy's not an existentialist, because existentialists don't understand this. Our wandering is by nature. It's because we have the natural phenomenon of language. And so Percy, for example, marks Sartre. Sartre, you know, took great pleasure in telling so many people about the irreducible loneliness of Sartre, but he experienced the joy in communicating. Oh, never mind. All right. You know, so the existentialist needs to reflect on why it is he can take such joy in communicating. He's given a natural capability not given to the other species. So that science, that new science, that realistic explanation of who we are, is the self-help Percy offers us. To repeat myself, helps us in being ambiguously at home with our homelessness, and so as home as we can be to enjoy the good things of the world. And there's all kinds of stuff I want to talk about, but the second Space Odyssey, to show this new science, Percy replaces the cave of Plato, which is also the cave of the movie theater in The Moviegoer, with Lost Cove. There really is a place, Lost Cove, Tennessee, but the cave is replaced by the place inhabited by people who are irreducibly lost, right? And so that cave has to be protected by the church. And so he has this elaborate discussion of why in a world where people don't experience themselves as lost, there in fact will be no more persons, and there'll be no more science, because there'll be no more scientists. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.